These promises strong as a spell. I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you.
Hi guys, welcome back to exmolex and happy October. A little while back, I mentioned in a video that Joseph Smith may have been involved in animal sacrifice. A lot of you guys were interested in hearing more, so in the spirit of spooky season, we're going to talk about that today, as well as more of Joseph's involvement in occult practices and folk magic. Now, as a former member of the Mormon Church, I can attest that most members of the church have no idea that Joseph Smith and other early church leaders were involved with any magical practices. I had no knowledge of any of this until I started my journey out of the church and I was doing more research. And personally, I was an active member of the church for 25 years. This just wasn't something that they taught in seminary or in Sunday school. So I have a few different examples to share, and then we'll jump into the animal sacrifice claims. Now let's start at the very beginning of Mormonism. And if you're familiar with Mormonism's origin story, you probably know about this, but you may not know the magical aspects of it. On the night of September 21st, 1823, Joseph Smith claimed that an angel named Moroni appeared to him and showed him where the golden plates, which would eventually become the Book of Mormon, were buried. Joseph Smith recorded that Moroni appeared to him 3 times that night, repeating the same instructions and adding a caution that he would be tempted by the devil. Now, what is the significance of the date? D. Michael Quinn writes in Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, Smith's prayer to commune with some kind of messenger on 21st September 1823 occurred once the moon had reached its maximum fullness the previous day and just before the autumnal equinox. The 1665 edition of Scott's works specified, and in the composition of any circle for magical feats, the fittest time is the brightest moonlight. An occult book published in New York in 1800 also stated, dreams are most to be depended on by men at the full time of the moon. Because the moon was the preferred time for treasure digging, it is probably no coincidence that, according to Martin Harris, Smith acted as a treasure seer earlier that night. In fact, his prayer to commune with some kind of messenger may have been in response to an unsuccessful group effort earlier that evening to locate treasure in the hill. That Smith's experience occurred at the autumnal equinox was also significant, because the planetary hours of invocation began at sunrise, which occurred at different times. Sibley's Occult Sciences had specified that the equinox was the time when the planetary hours of invocation corresponded most closely with the common hours of the clock. In the magic worldview, the equinox was a time when the earth would be expected to experience the introduction of broad cultural movements and religious ideas. So from the very beginning, it seems like Joseph Smith's magical worldview had an influence in his spirituality. And in fact, I would argue that that night he was attempting to summon some type of messenger using the power of the autumnal equinox and the full moon. Sounds kind of witchy, no? Another of his folk magic views centers on peep stones, which I've talked about a lot before on this channel. A seer stone or a peep stone was a stone used by practitioners of folk magic to see hidden things like missing objects or hidden treasure. Joseph used seer stones to treasure dig, and also he claimed to translate the golden plates. The LDS Church has actually acknowledged that he did do this. Now, what exactly was treasure digging or money digging? An article in the Wayne Sentinel, Palmyra, New York, on February 16, 1825 says, money digging. We are sorry to observe, even in this enlightened age, so prevalent a disposition to credit the accounts of the marvelous. Even the frightful stories of money being hid under the surface of the earth and enchanted by the devil or Robert Kidd are received by many of our respectable fellow citizens as truths. We had hoped that such a shameful undertaking would never have been acted over again in our country till the following event occurred not long ago in our vicinity. So even 200 years ago, during Joseph Smith's time, people were calling their time an enlightened age and recognized that this was fraudulent. Now, using his money-digging seer stones, Joseph Smith told his followers that God gave him the power to translate the golden plates. The procedure he used to translate the plates is called scrying. Now, scrying is something like looking into a crystal ball, or looking into a magic or obsidian mirror, looking into a bowl of water, or into complete darkness to summon the power of second sight. It sounds very magic-y when you say it in 2023, right? And apparently some people back in Joseph Smith's day thought so too. Joseph's method of scrying was to put a seer stone into a hat, then put his face into the hat and start his translation while his assistant wrote down his words. Magic at its most basic. Another somewhat bizarre and very magic-y aspect of Mormonism is the temple endowment ceremony. I've talked a lot about this as well, but just as a quick rundown, this is a ceremony held inside Mormon temples that only worthy Mormons who have paid their 10% tithing, follow the law of chastity, refrain from coffee, tea, and alcohol, and have met with their bishop and passed a series of questions in order to qualify for a temple recommend, are allowed to participate in. This is a ceremony where Mormons receive their temple garments for the first time, known to much of the outside world as magic Mormon underwear. And there's a good reason why. We'll get into it. Here are a few things I've written down that are very occult/magic related aspects of the temple ceremony. The washing and anointing of your body, which was originally done in a state of undress. Being sworn to secrecy to the point of making a blood oath. This has since changed. There are no longer penalties in the temple ceremony, but it was changed only in 1990, so not that long ago. I'm going to tell you and show you what those penalties were. The participants promised that, rather than reveal the content of the ceremony, they would suffer the following. My throat be cut from ear to ear, and my tongue torn out by its roots. Our breasts be torn open, our hearts and vitals torn out and given to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And our body be cut asunder, and all your bowels gush out. Say those things with a little bit of a witchy chant and boom, super spooky. I also have to mention, as a friend of mine recently pointed out to me, the second token of the Melchizedek priesthood, the patriarchal grip or sure sign of the nail, one of the tokens that you learn during the temple ceremony, it is so witchy. And honestly, I kind of think this makes it more fun. This is what it reads word for word. And again, I'm going to say it kind of witchy because once you hear it this way, you won't be able to hear it any other way. This is the name of the token. Health in the navel, marrow in the bones, strength in the loins and in the sinews, power in the priesthood be upon me and upon my posterity, through all generations of time and throughout all eternity. Now the temple garments. They are worn by Mormons as not only a protection from temptation and evil, but from actual physical harm. In church, we often heard stories about other Mormons being saved from being burned in a fire because they were wearing their garments, or saved from a car crash, or other similar things. The garments also have certain symbols on them, one over each breast, one on the navel, and one over the right knee, all with different meanings. They're meant to be worn under the clothes, so they're very close to you, always touching the skin, which is something that's pretty typical for magical items. You'll see that with witches sometimes, and they're meant to be worn 24/7. So as you can see, a lot of magical influence, no? Now, let's talk about Joseph Smith's possible connection to animal sacrifice. Now, to be clear, everything we've talked about prior to this is a sure thing. The seer stones, the rock in the hat, the temple rituals, the garments, the summoning of Moroni on the full moon. We know that this is stuff that is well documented as either happening or Joseph Smith's first-hand account claiming that he met Moroni. As we get into the animal sacrifice claims, it is important to note that these are just that. Claims. We don't have a whole lot of good, reliable, first-hand accounts that this for sure happened. I'm going to read you some of the quotes that I was able to find, and I'll let you decide if you think that it's a real possibility or not. So to start out, animal sacrifices were often part of the magical rituals that accompanied money digging. In the first edition of his book, Early Mormonism and the Magic Worldview, Dr. D. Michael Quinn gives this information. A cousin of Smith's wife, Emma, reported that Smith translated the Book of Mormon by the means of the same Peep stone and under the same inspiration that directed his enchantments and dog sacrifices. It was all by the same spirit. In a magic book known as The Greater Key of Solomon, page 122, we read that in many operations it is necessary to make some sort of sacrifice unto the demons, and in various ways. Such sacrifices consist of the blood and sometimes of the flesh. In 1833, William Stafford, who lived close to the Smiths, made this statement. It started with, I, William Stafford, having been called upon to give a true statement of my knowledge concerning the character and conduct of the family of Smiths, known to the world as the founders of the Mormon sect, and went on, Joseph Smith Sr. came to me one night and told me that Joseph Smith Jr. had been looking in his glass and had seen, not many rods from his house, 2 or 3 kegs of gold and silver. Joseph Smith Sr. first made a circle 12 or 14 feet in diameter. This circle, said he, contains the treasure. Then he stuck in the ground a row of witch hazel sticks around the said circle for the purpose of keeping off evil spirits. Within this circle, he made another of about 8 or 10 feet in diameter. He walked around 3 times on the periphery of this last circle, muttering to himself something which I could not understand. He next stuck a steel rod in the center of the circles, and then enjoined profound silence upon us, lest we should arouse the evil spirit who had the charge of these treasures. After we had dug a trench of about 5 feet in depth around the rod, the old man went to the house to inquire of young Joseph the cause of our disappointment. He soon returned and said that Joseph had remained all this time in the house, looking in his stone and watching the motions of the evil spirit, that he saw the spirit come to the ring, and as soon as it beheld the cone which we had formed around the rod, it caused the money to sink. Another time, they devised a scheme by which they might satiate their hunger with the mutton of one of my sheep. They had seen in my flock a sheep, a large, fat, black wether. Old Joseph and one of the boys came to me one day and said that Joseph Jr. had discovered some very remarkable and valuable treasures, which could be procured only in one way. That way was as follows: that a black sheep should be taken to the ground where the treasures were concealed, that after cutting its throat it should be led around in a circle while bleeding. This being done, the wrath of the evil spirit would be appeased. The treasures could then be obtained, and my share of them was to be fourfold. To gratify my curiosity, I let them have a large fat sheep. They afterwards informed me that the sheep was killed pursuant to commandment, but as there was some mistake in the process, it did not have the desired effect. This, I believe, is the only time they ever made money digging a profitable business. C.R. Stafford, William's nephew, testified concerning the same incident. Joe Smith, the prophet, told my uncle, William Stafford, that he wanted a fat, black sheep. He said that he wanted to cut its throat and make it walk in a circle 3 times, and it would prevent a pot of money from leaving. Emily Coburn and Emily M. Austin, Mormonism or Life Among the Mormons. In the time of their digging for money and not finding it attainable, Joe Smith told them there was a charm on the pots of money, and if some animal was killed and the blood sprinkled around the place, then they could get it. But again, money was scarce in those diggings. Still, they dug and dug, but never came to the precious treasure. Alas, how vivid was the expectation when the blood of poor Trey was used to take off the charm, and after all, to find their mistake. The sad thing about this one is that, if true, the dog they sacrificed had a name, Trey. That means it was likely someone's pet. Justice Joel King Noble, who tried Smith in an 1830 trial in Colesville, New York, related in a letter that when Joe Smith and others were digging for a chest of money, they acquired a black dog and offered it as a sacrifice, blood-sprinkled prayer made at the time the above sworn to on trial. Letter of Justice Noble, dated March 8, 1842. Joseph and Hill Lewis statements, 1879, in Early Mormon Documents, Dan Vogel. Vogel lists the original source as Hill Lewis Review of Mormonism, rejoinder to Elder Cadwell. Friend Cadwell, you say Messrs. Lewis would have us believe that Joseph Smith, Josiah Stowell, and others were such idiots as to offer and sacrifice a white dog, etc. Whether fools or idiots or not, we would have you believe that they did just such absurd things, and it is no greater stretch of credulity than it is to believe what you and others do of Joseph Smith. The facts are that the sacrifice of white dogs, black sluts, in this context, from what I understand, that means female dogs, black cats, and such like was an indispensable part or appendage of the art which Smith, the embryo prophet, was then practicing. He claimed to possess the supernatural power of second sight, or to see things at a distance and deep underground, and his frequent references to the enchantment proves that he was a conjurer, a sorcerer, which Webster defines an enchanter, and sorcery as witchcraft or intercourse with the devil. So we have no reason to doubt the truth of the statement about the white dog and the black slut, and that something of the kind took place each time the enchantment removed the treasure. It is hard to believe that men of common intelligence could believe that Joseph Smith could thus see, and believe in his conjuration, be so foolish as to spend thousands of dollars in such a way. But Smith translated his Book of Mormon mostly with the same peepstone and hat, and it is just as hard to believe in this inspired translation as to believe in the fact and efficacy of his dog sacrifices. Smith translated the Book of Mormon by this means of the same peepstone and under the same inspiration that directed his enchantments and dog sacrifices. It was all by the same Spirit. Christ says, "By their fruits ye shall know them." And by the application of Christ's rule, we know that Smith was a false prophet, to be sure, not equal to Muhammad. Let me also tell you that you are laboring under a delusion. So, what do you guys think? Personally, I don't think that we can really say for sure one way or another without more evidence. But the fact that animal sacrifices were often a part of money digging, which Joseph Smith was very involved in, makes it more believable to me. And what are your guys' thoughts on how this magic worldview might have inspired or influenced Joseph Smith in his spirituality and the creation of Mormonism? Let me know in the comments, because I feel like this is a very interesting and very perfect for this season conversation to have. Huge thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. You guys are the absolute best. And extra special thank you to Amy, Doug Davis, and Tans for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. If you guys are able to and you would like to support the channel and the work I do here, I would greatly appreciate that. There are links to do so in the description below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!
Promises strong as a spell, I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure.